The iron tang of blood hit Morgan Fletcher's nostrils before he saw her crumpled form in the narrow alley between the Mercantile and the saloon in Gunnison, Colorado. And when he dismounted his horse and rushed to her side, he found a young woman with dark hair matted with blood, and a face so swollen he could barely make out her features through the purple bruises. It was late September in 1882, and the autumn air carried a chill that made her violent shivering even more pronounced as she lay there in the dirt, her dress torn and filthy, her arms wrapped protectively around her ribs. Morgan knelt beside her, his weathered hands hovering uncertainly before he gently touched her shoulder. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was rough from years of trail dust, but there was an unmistakable gentleness in it that made her flinch less than she might have otherwise. Her eyes fluttered open, one nearly swollen shut, and she looked at him with such raw terror that his chest constricted painfully. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "My name is Morgan. I'm going to help you." She tried to speak, but only a whimper escaped her cracked lips. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, and Morgan could see her breathing was shallow and labored. He shrugged off his heavy coat and laid it gently over her trembling form. "Can you walk?" he asked, already knowing the answer but needing to assess just how badly she was injured. She shook her head no, and tears spilled down her battered cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dirt and blood. The crying seemed to cause her pain, and she gasped, clutching at her ribs with one arm while the other hung at an odd angle that made Morgan's jaw tighten with anger at whoever had done this to her. "All right, don't try to move," he said, rising to his feet. "I'm going to fetch Doc Morrison. You just hold on." Her good hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes wide with panic. She shook her head frantically, fresh tears flowing. Morgan understood immediately that she was afraid, that whoever had beaten her might still be looking for her, or that she simply could not bear to be left alone in that dark alley for even a moment. Okay, he soothed, kneeling back down. "I won't leave you. I'm going to carry you to the doctor myself. It might hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but we need to get you help." She nodded slightly, resignation and relief warring in her expression. Morgan was a big man, 6'3" with the kind of solid build that came from years of ranch work, and he lifted her as carefully as he could manage. Even so, she cried out in pain, the sound muffled against his chest as he settled her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, he noticed, far too light for a grown woman. "I've got you," he murmured, walking as smoothly as he could manage through the alley and out onto Main Street. His horse, a patient gray gelding named Smoke, followed behind without needing to be led. The few people still out at this late hour stared as Morgan carried his burden down the wooden boardwalk toward Doc Morrison's office at the far end of town. Mrs. Henderson gasped and clutched her shawl tighter, and old Pete Wilson took off his hat in a gesture of respect or sympathy. Morgan ignored them all, focused entirely on the woman in his arms whose ragged breathing seemed to be getting worse with each step. Doc Morrison's office was above the apothecary, and Morgan had to climb a narrow staircase that made the woman whimper with each jostling step. He called out as he reached the top, his voice urgent. Doc Morrison, I need you." The door flew open, and Dr. Samuel Morrison appeared, his gray hair standing on end as if he had been running his hands through it. He was in his shirt sleeves, spectacles perched on his nose, and his eyes widened when he saw Morgan's burden. "Good God, bring her in, bring her in." He gestured toward the examination room, clearing papers and books off the table with one sweep of his arm. "What happened?" "Found her in the alley behind Porter's Mercantile," Morgan said, laying her down as gently as possible. She cried out again, and her good hand found his, gripping it tightly. Somebody beat her bad, Doc. Morrison was already examining her with practiced efficiency, his hands moving carefully over her injuries. Her arm is broken, several ribs too from the feel of it, head wound, internal bleeding possibly. He looked up at Morgan with grim eyes. Who is she? I don't know. Never seen her before. Did you see who did this? Morgan shook his head, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Allie was empty except for her. The woman's grip on his hand had not loosened, and Morgan found himself unable to pull away even as Doc Morrison began the difficult work of setting her broken arm. She screamed then, a sound that cut through Morgan like a knife, and he moved to her other side so she could bury her face against his shoulder while the doctor worked. He found himself stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort that came from some deep instinctive place he had not known existed. I know it hurts. Just hold on to me. You're going to be all right. I promise you're going to be all right. Morrison worked quickly and efficiently, splinting the arm, wrapping her ribs, cleaning and stitching the gash on her head. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time her eyes opened and found Morgan still there beside her, something in her expression softened just a fraction. It was well past midnight when Doc Morrison finally stepped back, wiping blood from his hands with a cloth. She's stable for now, but she needs rest and careful watching. Those ribs could cause problems if she develops pneumonia, and I'm still concerned about internal injuries. He looked at Morgan thoughtfully. You know her people, someone who can look after her. Morgan realized he was still holding her hand. No, I told you I just found her, but I'll take care of her. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That might not be appropriate, Morgan. You are an unmarried man and she is a young woman. I don't give a damn about appropriate, Morgan said flatly. Somebody tried to kill her, Doc. She needs protection, not propriety. The sheriff should be informed. Already planning on it. But right now, she needs somewhere safe to recover, and my ranch is as safe as anywhere in this territory. Morgan looked down at the woman, whose eyes had opened again and were fixed on his face with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. She can have the spare room. My sister Clara will come stay and act as chaperone if it will satisfy the town gossips. Morrison sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Morgan's jaw. He had known the cowboy for 5 years, since Morgan had bought the old Henderson ranch and started building it into something profitable. And he knew that, when Morgan Fletcher made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. Fine, but she cannot be moved tonight. She needs to rest here, and you should go home and get some sleep yourself. Morgan looked down at the woman again. Her grip on his hand had loosened as the laudanum Morrison had given her began to take effect, but she was still watching him with those haunted eyes. Will you be here in the morning? She whispered, her voice so hoarse and broken it was barely audible. I will be, Morgan promised. Right here when you wake up. Promise. A single tear tracked down her bruised cheek. I swear it on my life. And Morgan meant it with an intensity that surprised him. She nodded once and let her eyes drift closed, her breathing evening out into the shallow rhythm of medicated sleep. Morgan carefully disentangled his hand from hers and stood, his body stiff from kneeling for so long. Morrison showed him to a small sitting room with a worn couch. You can stay here. I will wake you if her condition changes. Morgan nodded his thanks and stretched out on the couch, but sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her battered face, saw the terror in her eyes when he had first found her, heard her broken whisper asking him to promise he would be there. He had come into town simply to pick up supplies and have a drink, nothing more than an ordinary Friday evening, and now his life had pivoted in a direction he could not have anticipated. Who was she? Where had she come from? And who had hurt her so badly? He must have dozed eventually, because the next thing he knew, gray dawn light was filtering through the windows, and Doc Morrison was shaking his shoulder gently. "She is asking for you." Morgan was on his feet in an instant, following Morrison into the examination room. She was awake, propped up slightly on pillows, and though her face was still a mass of bruises, her eyes were clearer than they had been the night before. When she saw Morgan, something in her expression relaxed. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "Told you I would." Morgan approached the bed slowly, hat in his hands. In the morning light, he could see that, beneath the bruises, she was younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. Her hair, now cleaned of most of the blood, was a deep chestnut color, and her eyes were a remarkable shade of green. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a horse," she admitted with a ghost of a smile that vanished almost immediately as her lips pulled at the split skin. "The doctor says you saved my life. I just carried you here. Doc Morrison did the hard work. You stayed." It was not a question, but a statement of wonder, as if the simple act of keeping his promise was something remarkable to her. "I said I would." Morgan pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I need to ask you some questions if you are up to it. Doc says the sheriff should know what happened, but I wanted to talk to you first." Fear flickered across her face, quick and sharp. "Please do not bring the sheriff into this. Madam, somebody beat you nearly to death and left you in an alley. That person needs to answer for it. You do not understand." Her voice rose slightly, panicked, and she tried to sit up further before gasping in pain and falling back against the pillows. "The sheriff will not help me. He will make it worse. Please, I am begging you." Morgan exchanged glances with Doc Morrison, who stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his expression troubled. "Maybe you better tell us what happened," Morgan said gently. "Start with your name." She hesitated for so long he thought she might not answer at all. Finally, she whispered, "Deanna. Deanna Walsh." "Deanna," Morgan repeated, and he liked the way the name felt in his mouth. "I'm Morgan Fletcher. I own a cattle ranch about 5 miles out of town. Doc Morrison here has been patching up cowboys and townsfolk for longer than I have been in Colorado." Deanna looked between them, her expression torn between fear and desperate hope. "If I tell you, you have to promise me you will not go to the sheriff. Not yet. Not until I can leave town." "I cannot promise that," Morgan said honestly. "But I can promise that I will listen, and that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." It was clearly not the answer she wanted, but perhaps it was the one she needed, because after another long moment, she began to speak. "I came to Gunnison 3 months ago on the stage from Denver. I was running from my stepfather." Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she were reciting facts about someone else's life. "My mother died 2 years ago, and he wanted me to marry his business partner, a man named Victor Harding who was 48 years old and already buried 2 wives. I refused, and my stepfather said I was being selfish and ungrateful. He locked me in my room, said I would stay there until I agreed to the marriage." Morgan felt his hands curl into fists, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to interrupt her story. "I escaped one night when he had been drinking and forgot to lock the door properly. I took what little money my mother had left me and bought a ticket to the first place I could get to. That was Denver. I worked there for a while in a boarding house, but I saw my stepfather's men asking questions. So I ran again, this time to Gunnison." "What happened last night?" Morrison asked quietly. Diana's eyes filled with tears. "He found me. Victor Harding. He was here on business, he said, and he just happened to see me on the street. He cornered me behind the Mercantile when I was heading home from my job at the hotel. He said I belonged to him, that my stepfather had already taken his money from me, and that I would be coming back to Denver with him whether I wanted to or not. Her voice broke. I told him I would rather die. So he decided to teach me a lesson about defiance. The simple, terrible words hung in the air like smoke. Morgan felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce, the kind of anger he had not felt since his father had been killed by cattle rustlers 10 years ago. Where is he now? Morgan's voice was deadly quiet. I do not know. He left me there. I think he thought I was dead, or at least that I had learned my lesson and would not dare defy him again. Deanna met Morgan's eyes, and he saw steel beneath the fear. But I will never go back to Denver. I will die first, and I mean that. Morgan stood and began pacing, his mind racing through possibilities. Victor Harding. What does he look like? Tall, slender, dark hair going gray at the temples. Expensive clothes. He wears a gold ring on his right hand with a black stone. And he has a scar through his left eyebrow where his first wife cut him with a letter opener before she died. Morgan committed every detail to memory. Did anyone see him attack you? I do not know. It was dark, and I was just trying to fight him off. She looked down at her splinted arm, her broken body. I was not very successful. You are alive, Morrison said firmly. That makes you successful, young lady. Morgan stopped pacing and returned to Deanna's bedside. I know you do not want the sheriff involved, but I need you to trust me on this. Sheriff Dawson is a good man, honest and fair. If this Victor Harding is still in town, he needs to be arrested. And if he has already left, then there needs to be a warrant out for him so he cannot just waltz back into Colorado and finish what he started. Deanna looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Why do you care what happens to me? You do not even know me. It was a fair question, and Morgan found himself struggling to answer it. Why did he care so much? He had seen plenty of violence and injustice in his 30 years, had learned to mind his own business and not get involved in other people's troubles. But something about finding Deanna broken and bleeding in that alley had struck him in a place he had thought was long since hardened by loss and loneliness. Because nobody deserves what happened to you, he said finally. And because when I found you in that alley, you looked at me like I was the first hope you had had in a long time. I am not about to let you down now. Fresh tears spilled down Diana's cheeks, but these seemed different from the others, born of relief rather than fear or pain. All right, she whispered. I will trust you. Talk to the sheriff if you think it will help. Morgan nodded and looked at Morrison. Keep your door locked and do not let anyone in unless you know them. I will be back as soon as I can. He left the doctor's office and walked directly to the sheriff's office 3 doors down. Sheriff Tom Dawson was already at his desk, working through a stack of papers with a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up when Morgan entered and gestured to a chair. Morgan, what brings you to town so early? Thought you would be heading back to the ranch by now. Morgan remained standing. Found a woman beaten near to death in the alley behind Porter's last night. She is at Doc Morrison's now, and she just told me who did it. Dawson was on his feet immediately, his easy manner replaced by sharp professionalism. Tell me everything. Morgan relayed Deanna's story, watching as the sheriff's expression grew grimmer with each detail. When he finished, Dawson reached for his hat and gun belt. Victor Harding, you said. I know that name. He is some kind of investor from Denver, been in town for the past week talking to the mining companies about putting money into the Silver Queen operation, staying at the Grand Hotel. The sheriff's eyes were hard. If he is still here, I will bring him in. But Morgan, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that a man like that, with money and connections, might not face the justice he deserves. Then I will deliver that justice myself, Morgan said flatly. No, you will not, because that would make you a murderer and me a failure at my job. Dawson strapped on his gun belt and checked his revolver. "The law will handle this, Morgan. I promise you that." They walked together to the Grand Hotel, a three-story structure that was the finest establishment in Gunnison, with its red velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers imported all the way from San Francisco. The desk clerk, a thin man named Simmons with a nervous disposition, looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Sheriff, Mr. Fletcher, good morning. What can I do for you, Victor Harding?" "What room?" Dawson's hand rested casually on his gun, but his tone left no room for argument. Simmons swallowed hard. "Room 12, second floor, but I should tell you he checked out early this morning, not more than an hour ago. Took the first stage out." Morgan cursed under his breath. Dawson kept his composure, but his jaw tightened. "Which direction?" "Back to Denver," he said. "Seemed to be in quite a hurry." "Did he say why he was leaving so suddenly?" Morgan asked, his voice tight. "No, sir, but I noticed his knuckles were all bruised and swollen. He said he had an accident, slipped and fell." Simmons looked between them nervously. "Is something wrong?" "That man beat a woman nearly to death last night and left her to die in an alley," Dawson said bluntly. "If he comes back to Gunnison, you send word to me immediately, you understand?" Simmons paled. "Yes, Sheriff, of course." They left the hotel and stood on the boardwalk, both men frustrated and angry. "I will send a telegram to the marshal in Denver, get a warrant issued," Dawson said. "But you know as well as I do that men like Harding have ways of making legal troubles disappear." "Then Deanna is still in danger." "Most likely, yes. He knows she can identify him, and men like that do not like loose ends." Dawson looked at Morgan thoughtfully. "You said you were going to take her to your ranch to recover." "That was my plan. Might be the safest place for her, at least until we can sort this out. Your place is remote enough that anyone coming after her would be seen long before they arrived, and I know you can handle yourself if it comes to trouble." The sheriff paused. "But Morgan, you need to think carefully about this. Taking responsibility for this woman, protecting her, it is not going to be easy, and there will be talk." "Let people talk," Morgan said. "I told her I would keep her safe, and that is what I intend to do." Dawson clapped him on the shoulder. "You are a good man, Morgan Fletcher. I will do everything I can on my end to make sure Harding faces justice. In the meantime, you watch your back." Morgan returned to Doc Morrison's office to find Deanna awake and looking anxious. Her face lit up when he entered, an expression that did strange things to his heart. "Is he arrested?" she asked hopefully. "He left town on the early stage, headed back to Denver." Morgan pulled up the chair again and sat down. "But Sheriff Dawson is getting a warrant issued, and I am taking you to my ranch where you will be safe while you recover." Diana bit her lip, wincing at the pain. "I have no money to pay you for your help. I spent almost everything I had left on rent for a room I will probably be evicted from by now. I am not asking for payment. I am asking you to let me help you, to let me keep you safe." Morgan leaned forward, his voice earnest. "I have a spare room, plenty of space, and my ranch is far enough from town that nobody will bother you there. My sister Clara lives in town, and I will ask her to come stay as well, so everything is proper and respectable. Your sister might not want a strange woman in her brother's house. Clara will be fine with it once I explain what happened. She is the kindest person I know." Morgan smiled slightly. "She is also the nosiest, so be prepared for a lot of questions, but her heart is in the right place." Deanna looked at him for a long moment, and Morgan saw her making a decision, weighing trust against fear. Finally, she nodded. "All right. Thank you, Morgan. I do not know how I will ever repay this kindness." "You do not have to repay anything, just focus on getting better." Doc Morrison declared that Deanna could be moved that afternoon if they took it slow and kept her comfortable. Morgan rode to his sister's house. a neat little cottage on the east side of town where Clara lived with her husband Robert, a banker, and their 2 young daughters. Clara answered the door with flour on her apron and a warm smile that faltered when she saw Morgan's serious expression. "What is wrong? Did something happen? I need your help, Clara. Can we talk?" She ushered him inside and poured coffee while he explained the situation. Clara listened with growing horror and compassion, her blue eyes, so like Morgan's own, welling with tears when he described finding Deanna in the alley. "That poor girl. Of course I will come stay at the ranch for as long as she needs me." Clara set down her coffee cup decisively. "Robert will understand. He can manage the girls for a while, or they can stay with his mother. When are you taking her out there?" "This afternoon, if she is strong enough. Doc Morrison is going to ride out tomorrow to check on her. Then I will pack a bag and meet you at the ranch before supper." Clara reached across the table and squeezed Morgan's hand. "You are doing a good thing, Morgan. Mother would be proud of you." Their mother had died 5 years ago, just a year before Morgan had bought the ranch and moved to Colorado from Kansas. She had been a kind woman with a fierce sense of justice and an absolute intolerance for bullies and cowards. Morgan hoped she would indeed be proud of what he was doing. He spent the next hour buying supplies at Porter's Mercantile, including fabric for dresses, since Deanna had only the torn and bloodied clothes she had been wearing. Mrs. Porter, the owner's wife, raised an eyebrow at the purchases but said nothing, though Morgan knew the gossip would be spreading through town within the hour. By the time he returned to Doc Morrison's office, a wagon had been prepared with blankets and pillows to make Deanna as comfortable as possible for the journey. Morrison had given her another dose of laudanum for the pain, and she was drowsy but awake as Morgan carried her carefully down the stairs and settled her in the wagon bed. "Try to sleep if you can," he told her. "It is about an hour ride to the ranch, and I will go as slow as I can manage, but it still might be rough." Deanna nodded, her eyes already drifting closed. Morgan climbed up onto the driver's seat and took up the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. True to his word, he kept the pace slow and steady, avoiding the worst of the ruts in the road as much as possible. The ranch appeared as they crested the final hill, and Morgan felt the familiar swell of pride he always experienced when he saw his home. The house was solid timber and stone, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it were the barns and corrals, and beyond that, the grazing land stretched for acres, dotted with his growing herd of cattle. He had worked hard for this place, built it with his own hands and sweat and determination, and now he was bringing Deanna here, offering her sanctuary in the place he valued most. He pulled the wagon up as close to the house as possible and went around to check on Deanna. She was awake, her eyes taking in her surroundings with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "Welcome to the Fletcher Ranch," Morgan said, offering her a small smile. "I am going to carry you inside now." He lifted her from the wagon bed, and she instinctively wrapped her good arm around his neck to steady herself. Being this close to her, Morgan caught the scent of soap and medicine from Doc Morrison's ministrations, but beneath that was something else, something distinctly her that made him intensely aware of the woman in his arms. The house was clean and orderly, thanks to Mrs. Chen, a widow who came twice a week to cook and clean in exchange for a fair wage and vegetables from the kitchen garden. Morgan carried Deanna upstairs to the spare room, which had a large bed with a patchwork quilt his mother had made years ago and a window that looked out over the front pasture. "This is your room for as long as you need it," he said, setting her gently on the bed. "The necessary is down the hall, and my room is across from yours if you need anything during the night. My sister Clara will be here soon, and she will stay in the room next to yours." Deanna looked around the room, tears gathering in her eyes again. "I do not know what to say. This is more than I could have hoped for." "Say you will rest and heal and stop worrying for a while," Morgan said. "Everything else can wait." He left her to rest and went about the evening chores, feeding the horses and checking on the cattle with the help of his 2 ranch hands, Pete and Tommy, who lived in the bunkhouse and had been with him since he had bought the place. They asked about the woman, having seen Morgan carry her inside, and he gave them the basic facts without going into detail about the violence she had suffered. "She will be staying here while she recovers," he told them firmly. "My sister Clara is coming to stay as well. If anyone comes around asking about Diana or looking suspicious, you come get me immediately. And if I am not here, you protect her with your life. Understand?" Both men nodded solemnly. They were good men, loyal and hardworking, and Morgan trusted them. Clara arrived just as the sun was setting, driving her own small buggy with a large carpet bag beside her. Morgan helped her down and carried her bag inside while she immediately went upstairs to check on Deanna. He could hear their voices, Clara's warm and soothing, Deanna's hesitant and soft, as he prepared a simple supper of bread, cheese, and cold chicken that Mrs. Chen had left for him. When Clara came back downstairs, her eyes were red and she hugged Morgan tightly. "She is so young and so frightened. What kind of monster does that to another human being?" "The kind that will answer for it eventually," Morgan said grimly. They ate supper together, and Clara brought a tray up to Deanna, staying with her while she picked at the food. Morgan sat on the porch, watching the stars come out and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. His life had become complicated in the span of 24 hours, but he found he did not regret his decision to help Deanna. If anything, he felt more alive than he had in years, driven by a purpose beyond simply keeping his ranch running. The next few days fell into a routine. Clara tended to Deanna with gentle efficiency, helping her wash and dress, bringing her meals, sitting with her when the pain or fear became too much. Doc Morrison rode out twice to check on his patient and declared himself satisfied with her progress. The swelling in Diana's face began to go down, revealing delicate features and a beauty that was made more striking by the strength Morgan saw growing in her eyes each day. Morgan found excuses to check on her throughout the day, bringing her fresh water, asking if she needed anything, lingering in the doorway to talk. She told him more about her life, about growing up in Boston before her mother married the man who would become Diana's jailer, about her dreams of opening a school for girls someday, about her love of books and music, and the ordinary dreams that had been stolen from her by violence and greed. In turn, Morgan told her about his own life, about growing up in Kansas with Clara and their parents, about losing his father to rustlers and his mother to pneumonia, about the dream that had brought him to Colorado and the satisfaction he found in building something with his own hands. They talked for hours, and Morgan found himself sharing things he had never told anyone, drawn out by Diana's genuine interest and the way she listened as if his words mattered. A week after bringing Deanna to the ranch, Morgan was working in the barn when he heard a horse approaching at speed. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out to see Tommy riding hard toward the house, his face urgent. "Boss, there is a man on the road heading this way, fancy dressed, riding a black horse." Morgan's blood ran cold. "Get to the house. Make sure Clara and Deanna stay inside and away from the windows." He positioned himself on the porch, rifle held loosely but ready, as the rider came into view. The man matched Diana's description of Victor Harding perfectly, from the expensive suit to the arrogant way he sat his horse. He reined in about 20 feet from the porch and looked at Morgan with cold calculation. I am looking for a woman named Deanna Walsh. I was told she might be here." "Told by who?" Morgan kept his voice level, his body relaxed despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "That is not your concern. I have business with Miss Walsh, and I would appreciate it if you would fetch her for me." "I do not think so." Harding's expression hardened. "I do not believe you understand the situation. Deanna is under contract to become my wife. Her stepfather accepted payment, and she is legally bound to honor that agreement. I am simply here to collect what belongs to me." "People do not belong to other people, not anymore," Morgan said flatly. "And I am pretty sure contract law does not include the right to beat a woman unconscious and leave her for dead in an alley." Something flickered in Harding's eyes, surprise quickly masked. "I do not know what she told you, but Deanna has always had a tendency toward melodrama and dishonesty. Whatever injuries she sustained were self-inflicted in another desperate bid for attention." Morgan felt his finger tighten on the rifle trigger, but he kept his voice calm. "That is an interesting story, but it does not match the facts. Sheriff Dawson has issued a warrant for your arrest, Harding. You are supposed to be in Denver, not harassing women on my property. Sheriff Dawson has no jurisdiction over a civil contract dispute. Maybe not, but he has jurisdiction over attempted murder." Morgan took a step forward. "You have got about 10 seconds to turn that horse around and ride away before I show you what we do to men who hurt women out here in Colorado." Harding's hand moved toward his coat, and Morgan raised the rifle in one smooth motion, aiming directly at the other man's chest. "I would not do that if I were you." They stared at each other for a long, tense moment. Finally, Harding smiled, cold and reptilian. "This is not over, Fletcher. Deanna is mine, bought and paid for, and I will have what I am owed. The only thing you are owed is a prison cell or a grave. Your choice." Harding wheeled his horse around and rode off at a gallop, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Morgan did not lower the rifle until the man was completely out of sight. Then he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and went inside to find Deanna white-faced and shaking in Clara's arms. "He found me," she whispered. "I knew he would not give up. And now he knows I am not going to let him take you," Morgan said firmly. He knelt in front of her, taking her good hand in his. "I am riding into town right now to tell Sheriff Dawson that Harding is back. This is going to end, Deanna. I promise you." She looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, and Morgan saw both fear and something else in their depths, something that made his heart race. "Please be careful. Victor is dangerous, and he has money to hire men who are even more dangerous. I can handle myself. You just stay here with Clara and keep the doors locked." He stood and looked at his sister. "Tommy and Pete are armed and know to keep watch. Do not open the door for anyone except me or Doc Morrison." The ride into town felt twice as long as usual, Morgan pushing Smoke harder than he normally would. By the time he reached the sheriff's office, the horse was lathered, and Morgan's temper was barely contained. Sheriff Dawson listened to his account of Harding's visit with a grim expression. "That man has nerve, I will give him that. Coming back here after I made it clear he was wanted. He thinks his money makes him untouchable," Morgan said. "We need to prove him wrong. I will send my deputy to the hotel and to the saloons. If Harding is in town, we will find him and bring him in." Dawson reached for his gun belt. "But Morgan, you need to understand something. Even if we arrest him, even if we put him on trial, men like Victor Harding rarely face real consequences. His lawyers will tie this up for months, maybe years, and in the end he will probably pay a fine and walk free. Then what am I supposed to do? Just wait for him to come back and finish what he started? No. You protect Deanna the best you can and hope that eventually Harding gets tired of chasing her and moves on to easier prey." Dawson's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "I know it is not the answer you want, but it is the truth of how these things work." Morgan left the sheriff's office feeling frustrated and helpless, two emotions he hated with equal intensity. He stopped at Porter's Mercantile to pick up more supplies, aware of the stares and whispers that followed him through the store. The gossip about Deanna staying at his ranch had clearly spread through town, and not all of it was kind. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife and Gunnison's self-appointed moral authority, cornered him by the canned goods. "Mr. Fletcher, I wonder if I might have a word about this young woman you have taken into your home." "I do not recall asking for your opinion on the matter, Mrs. Henderson." She sniffed, her face pinched with disapproval. "Nevertheless, as a prominent member of this community, I feel it is my duty to point out that an unmarried man living under the same roof as an unmarried woman, even with a chaperone present, is highly improper." "What is improper is a woman being beaten and having nowhere safe to go," Morgan said coldly. "Now, if you will excuse me." He paid for his supplies and left before he said something he would regret. The ride back to the ranch was filled with dark thoughts about Victor Harding and the kind of justice that existed only outside the law. Over the next 2 weeks, Diana grew stronger each day. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to faint shadows beneath her skin. Her arm, still splinted, itched terribly but was healing straight and true according to Doc Morrison. More importantly, the fear in her eyes began to recede, replaced by something softer and warmer, especially when she looked at Morgan. Clara noticed it, of course. His sister missed nothing when it came to matters of the heart. She cornered Morgan one evening while Deanna was resting and fixed him with a knowing look. "You are falling in love with her." It was not a question, but Morgan tried to deny it anyway. "I am just helping someone who needs it." "Morgan Andrew Fletcher, I have known you your entire life, and I have never seen you look at a woman the way you look at Deanna." Clara smiled gently. "It is nothing to be ashamed of. She is lovely and brave and kind. Anyone would fall in love with her. She has been through hell, Clara. The last thing she needs is me complicating her recovery with unwanted feelings." "What makes you think your feelings would be unwanted?" Morgan had no answer for that. He had caught Deanna watching him sometimes, her expression soft and wondering, but he had convinced himself he was imagining it, that she was simply grateful for his help and nothing more. That evening, Morgan was in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling when Deanna appeared in the doorway, leaning on a walking stick Clara had found for her. She had been working hard on getting her strength back, walking a little more each day, and Morgan's heart swelled with pride at her determination. "Should you be out here alone?" he asked, setting down the grooming brush and walking over to her. "Clara knows where I am." "I wanted some fresh air, and I wanted to talk to you." She looked up at him, and in the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the barn doors, she was so beautiful that Morgan's breath caught in his throat. "What did you want to talk about?" "Tomorrow marks 3 weeks since you found me in that alley. 3 weeks since you saved my life and brought me to your home and treated me with more kindness than I have ever known." Deanna's voice was steady, but Morgan could see emotion shimmering in her eyes. "I need you to know how much that means to me, how much you mean to me." Morgan's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Deanna, I just did what anyone would do." "No, you did what you would do because you are a good man, Morgan Fletcher. You are kind and strong and honorable, and I know I have no right to say this when you have already done so much for me, but I need you to know that I have feelings for you. Deep feelings that go far beyond gratitude." Morgan stared at her, stunned into silence. Deanna took a shaky breath and continued. "I understand if you do not feel the same way. I understand if I am just a responsibility to you, someone you are helping out of the goodness of your heart. But I could not keep silent any longer because the thought of leaving here someday, of never seeing you again, is more painful than anything Victor Harding did to me. Diana, Morgan breathed, and then he was moving, closing the space between them and cupping her face gently in his work-roughened hands. I have been half in love with you since the moment you grabbed my wrist and asked me not to leave you in that alley. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your courage, it has just made me fall deeper. I did not say anything because I was afraid of taking advantage of your situation, of making you feel obligated to return feelings you might not have. I have them, Diana said fiercely. I have them so much that it terrifies me because I have never felt this way about anyone before. Morgan leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Diana rose up on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was achingly tender, careful of her still healing injuries but filled with all the emotion that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Morgan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Diana Walsh. I do not know how it happened so fast, but I do. I love you. I love you too, Diana whispered, and then she laughed, the sound bright and joyful. I love you, Morgan Fletcher, and I want to stay here with you forever if you will have me. Forever sounds perfect. They stood in the barn as the sun set around them, holding each other and talking in soft voices about the future they wanted to build together. Diana admitted that she was still afraid of Victor Harding, that she worried he would return and try to take her away, but Morgan swore on everything he held dear that he would never let that happen. I will keep you safe, he promised. And when enough time has passed and you feel ready, I would like to make you my wife properly and legally, so that no contract or claim Harding thinks he could ever stand. Diana pulled back enough to look up at him. Are you proposing to me, Morgan Fletcher? I am saying that when you are ready, when you have had time to heal and be sure of what you want, I will ask you properly. But yes, I suppose I am letting you know my intentions. He smiled at her. Is that too forward? It is perfect, Diana said, reaching up to touch his face with her good hand. And my answer when you ask properly will be yes. They returned to the house hand in hand, and Clara took one look at their faces and burst into tears of happiness. Finally. I have been waiting for you two to admit what was obvious to everyone else. That night, Morgan lay in his bed across the hall from Diana and thought about how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He had gone from a solitary rancher, focused only on building his herd and his land, to a man in love, making plans for a future that included a wife and eventually children and all the messy, wonderful complications of a shared life. But first, they had to deal with Victor Harding. The man had gone quiet after his confrontation with Morgan, and Sheriff Dawson reported that he had left town again, this time supposedly for good. But Morgan did not trust it. Men like Harding did not give up easily, and the more time passed without incident, the more on edge Morgan became. His instincts proved correct a month later, on a cold October morning when frost turned the ranch yard silver and breath steamed in the early air. Morgan was out checking the fence line when he heard gunshots from the direction of the house. He wheeled Smoke around and galloped back at a dead run, his rifle in his hand and his heart in his throat. He arrived to find Tommy and Pete engaged in a gunfight with 3 men on horseback who were trying to force their way into the house. Morgan did not hesitate, bringing his rifle up and firing at the nearest attacker. The man fell from his horse with a cry, and the other 2 turned their attention to this new threat. Bullets whined past Morgan's head as he dove from Smoke and took cover behind the water trough. He fired again, hitting one of the horses and sending its rider tumbling to the ground. Tommy's shotgun boomed, and the third attacker wheeled his horse and rode off at a gallop, leaving his companions behind. Morgan rushed to the house, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. He found Clara and Deanna huddled together in the hallway, both pale but unharmed. Deanna threw herself into his arms the moment she saw him, and he held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and thanking God she was safe. "They came out of nowhere," Clara said, her voice shaking. "3 men demanding we hand Deanna over. When we refused, they started shooting." Morgan looked down at Deanna. "Was Harding with them?" She shook her head. "I did not see him, but one of the men said they were here to collect Mr. Harding's property." Rage swept through Morgan, hot and fierce. He gently disentangled himself from Deanna and went back outside where Pete and Tommy were standing guard over the 2 men Morgan had shot. One was dead, the other clutching a wounded shoulder and cursing steadily. "Who hired you?" Morgan demanded, kneeling beside the wounded man. "Go to hell, Cowboy." Morgan pressed his boot against the man's wounded shoulder and the man screamed. "Who hired you?" "Harding, Victor Harding. He is paying $500 to bring the woman back alive." Morgan removed his boot and stood, his expression grim. This was worse than he had thought. Harding had not given up. Instead, he had put a bounty on Deanna's head, and if these 3 men had found the ranch, others would follow. Sheriff Dawson arrived an hour later with his deputy, having heard the gunshots from town. He took statements from everyone and arrested the wounded man, but his expression was troubled as he pulled Morgan aside. "This changes things. If Harding has put a bounty out, then Deanna is not safe anywhere, not even here." Dawson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I hate to say it, but she might be safer if she left Colorado altogether, went somewhere Harding could not find her." "No," Deanna said firmly from the doorway, where she had been listening. "I will not run anymore. I am tired of being afraid, tired of letting Victor Harding control my life. I am staying here with Morgan, and I will fight anyone who tries to take me." Morgan wanted to argue, wanted to bundle her onto a train and send her somewhere safe, but he also knew that Deanna was right. Running would not solve the problem. Harding would keep hunting her no matter where she went. The only way to end this was to end Harding himself, one way or another. "Then we need to bring this to a head," Morgan said quietly. "I am going to Denver to find Harding and settle this once and for all." "Morgan, no," Deanna protested. "That is exactly what he wants. He is trying to draw you out." "Maybe, but I cannot sit here waiting for the next group of hired guns to show up and put you and Clara in danger." Morgan took Deanna's hands in his. "I need to end this so we can have the life we talked about without always looking over our shoulders." Sheriff Dawson nodded slowly. "I will ride with you. Harding has committed crimes in my jurisdiction, and I have the legal authority to arrest him anywhere in Colorado. We will do this by the book, Morgan. No vigilante justice, no matter how much he might deserve it." Deanna was crying, but she nodded reluctantly. "Promise me you will come back. Promise me you will not do anything reckless." "I promise," Morgan said, kissing her forehead. "I love you too much to take unnecessary risks." They left the next morning, Morgan and Sheriff Dawson, armed and determined. Clara and Deanna stayed at the ranch with Pete and Tommy on high alert, ready for any more attempts to take Deanna. The ride to Denver took 3 days, and Morgan used the time to plan what he would say, how he would handle the confrontation when it came. Denver was a sprawling city compared to Gunnison, full of noise and people and opportunities for a man like Harding to hide. But Dawson had contacts, other lawmen who helped them track Harding to his office in a fancy brick building downtown. They walked in without knocking, Morgan's hand on his gun and Dawson's badge displayed prominently. Harding looked up from his desk with an expression of mild annoyance that changed to alarm when he recognized them. "Victor Harding, you are under arrest for assault with intent to kill and for conspiracy to commit kidnapping," Dawson said formally. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Harding stood, but instead of complying, he reached into his desk drawer. Morgan's gun was out and aimed at him in a heartbeat. "I would not do that unless you want to die right here in your expensive office." Harding froze, his face twisting with fury. "You have no authority here. I am a respected businessman with connections to the governor himself. Do you really think you can just waltz in here and arrest me? I have a warrant signed by a judge in Gunnison, and that gives me authority anywhere in Colorado," Dawson said calmly. "Now you can come peacefully, or we can drag you out of here in chains. Your choice." For a long moment, Morgan thought Harding was going to fight. His hand was still in the drawer, his eyes calculating the odds. But then he seemed to deflate, pulling his hand back empty and allowing Dawson to cuff him. "This is not over," Harding hissed as they let him out. "My lawyers will have me out by tomorrow, and then I will make sure both of you regret this." "You can try," Morgan said, "but if you ever come near Deanna again, I will kill you. That is not a threat, it is a promise." They took Harding to the Denver jail and turned him over to the local authorities with all the evidence of his crimes. The Denver sheriff, a burly man named Mackenzie, listened to their account with growing anger. "I've heard rumors about Harding for years, but nobody was ever willing to testify against him. His previous wives both died under suspicious circumstances, but there was never enough proof to charge him with anything." Mackenzie looked at Harding with disgust. "Looks like your luck finally ran out. My lawyers will have something to say about this," Harding said coldly. "I am sure they will. But in the meantime, you will be staying here until your trial." Mackenzie turned to Morgan and Dawson. "The woman he attacked, Deanna Walsh, she will need to testify." "Can she do that?" "She can and she will," Morgan said with certainty. They stayed in Denver long enough to ensure that Harding was securely locked up and that the case against him was solid. Morgan sent a telegram to Clara letting them know what had happened, and he received one back from Deanna that simply said, "Come home. I miss you." The ride back to Gunnison felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. Dawson was satisfied that justice would be served, and Morgan allowed himself to hope that maybe, finally, Deanna would be safe. He arrived at the ranch to find Deanna waiting on the porch, and the moment she saw him, she was running, ignoring the protest of her recently healed ribs. Morgan caught her in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief and joy. "It is over," he told her. "Harding is in jail and he is going to stand trial for what he did to you." Deanna pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "Is it really over? Can I really stop being afraid?" "It is really over," Morgan confirmed. He set her down and dropped to one knee right there in the ranch yard, pulling out a simple gold band he had bought in Denver. "Deanna Walsh, I know we have not known each other long, and I know we have been through hell to get to this point, but I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Deanna did not even hesitate. "Yes. Yes, Morgan, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that was witnessed by Clara, Pete, and Tommy, all of whom cheered from the porch. When they finally broke apart, Deanna was laughing and crying at the same time, and Morgan felt his heart swell with a happiness he had never imagined possible. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Gunnison, with half the town in attendance despite the earlier gossip. Clara stood up with Deanna as her matron of honor, and Robert, Clara's husband, stood up with Morgan. Deanna wore a simple white dress that Clara had helped her make, and she looked so beautiful that Morgan felt tears prick at his own eyes as she walked down the aisle toward him. The preacher kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Morgan kissed Diana with all the love and promise of their future together. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and music provided by old Pete Wilson on his fiddle, and a few other townspeople with instruments. Morgan danced with his wife under the stars, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. Diana looked up at him with her remarkable green eyes, and he saw his own happiness reflected back at him. "I love you, Mrs. Fletcher," he murmured. "I love you too, Mr. Fletcher," she replied, standing on her toes to kiss him again. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved me too," Morgan said honestly. "I was just going through the motions before I found you. Now I have a reason to build something that lasts." As winter settled over Colorado, Morgan and Diana built their life together at the ranch. Diana proved to be a natural with the horses, and took over managing the books with an efficiency that impressed Morgan. She also started teaching some of the local children to read in the front parlor twice a week, fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in her own way. Victor Harding's trial took place in Denver in January, and Diana made the journey with Morgan to testify. It was difficult, reliving that terrible night in the alley, but she did it with courage and dignity that made Morgan incredibly proud. Harding was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. His lawyers appealed, of course, but the conviction stood, and Diana was finally, truly free. Spring brought new calves and the first shoots of green in the pastures. Diana discovered she was pregnant in April, and Morgan was so happy he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests about being careful. Their son was born in December of 1883, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features. They named him Samuel, after Doc Morrison, who had saved Diana's life that terrible night, and the old doctor cried when they told him. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, all the normal challenges of making a living from the land. But Morgan and Diana faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Grace born in 1885, and another son named Thomas in 1887. The house rang with laughter and childish voices, and Morgan often found himself pausing in his work to watch Diana playing with the children in the yard, grateful beyond measure for the family they had built. Diana never forgot what Morgan had done for her that September night in 1882, how he had found her broken and bleeding and had chosen to help rather than walk away. She told him often how much she loved him, how grateful she was for the life they had built together, but Morgan always told her the gratitude went both ways. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a rancher," he would say, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me a family and a purpose, and a love I never thought I would find." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Morgan and Diana stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. 3 children played in the yard under Clara's watchful eye, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. "You ever regret it?" Diana asked quietly, leaning against Morgan's solid strength. "Taking in a stranger, dealing with all the complications I brought into your life." Morgan turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face the way he had that first time in the barn. "Not for a single second. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Diana. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled, that beautiful smile that still made his heart race even after 10 years of marriage. "I love you, Morgan Fletcher. Thank you for asking if I could walk that night and for carrying me when I could not. I will always carry you when you need me to, Morgan promised. That is what love is. That is what we built together. They kissed as the sun set on another day in their life together, surrounded by the family they had created and the love that had grown from the darkest moment of Diana's life into something bright and beautiful and lasting. The ranch prospered, their children grew strong and healthy, and Morgan and Diana Fletcher lived out their days in the Colorado mountains, testament to the power of kindness, courage, and a love that had been forged in adversity and tempered by devotion. Years passed, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their family. Samuel grew into a strong young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind with numbers. Grace inherited Diana's green eyes and her compassionate heart, often bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with such charm that even when he deserved punishment, he could make his parents laugh. Morgan expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available and building his herd into one of the finest in Colorado. Diana's informal school grew as well, and eventually the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as the official teacher, a position she held with pride for 15 years before passing it on to a younger woman so she could spend more time with her grandchildren. Because there were grandchildren eventually. Samuel married a sweet girl named Rebecca from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Morgan and Diana their first grandchild, a boy they named Morgan after his grandfather. Grace married a doctor who had moved to Gunnison from Philadelphia, and they had 3 children in quick succession. Thomas took his time settling down, but when he finally did, it was with a fiery red-haired woman who matched him in spirit and gave him 4 daughters who led him on a merry chase. Through it all, Morgan and Diana remained the center of their ever-growing family. The ranch became the gathering place for holidays and celebrations. The house expanded twice to accommodate everyone, and the sound of laughter and love filled every room. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Morgan stood to make a toast. His hair was gray now, his face weathered by decades of Colorado sun and wind, but his eyes were still bright when he looked at Diana. 40 years ago, I found a woman in an alley who needed help, and I made a promise to keep her safe. What I did not know then was that she would be the one to save me, to give my life meaning and purpose beyond anything I had imagined. He raised his glass. To Diana, the love of my life, my partner in everything, the strongest and bravest woman I have ever known. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, and thank you for 40 years of love and laughter and building this beautiful family together. Diana wiped tears from her eyes as everyone cheered and drank to the toast. When the noise died down, she stood as well, her hand in Morgan's. I was asked to walk that night and I could not, but Morgan carried me not just to safety, but to a life I never dreamed possible. He gave me love when I had only known fear, safety when I had only known danger, and a family when I thought I would always be alone. She looked around at all the faces gathered in their home. Everything good in my life started the moment Morgan Fletcher asked if I could walk and refused to leave me when I said no. I love you, my darling husband, today and always. They kissed to more cheers and applause, and the celebration continued late into the night. Morgan and Diana slipped away eventually, walking hand in hand to the porch where they had stood so many times over the years, watching the sun set over the land they loved. No regrets? Diana asked, the same question she had asked on their 10th anniversary and on many occasions since. Not a single one, Morgan answered. the same response he always gave because it was always true. "You are my life, Deanna. You always have been, from the moment I found you in that alley." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one in the vast Colorado sky. Inside the house, their family carried on the celebration, but out here it was just the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning when Morgan had promised to keep Deanna safe, and she had promised to trust him. They had kept those promises and built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma and fear. Their love story had started with violence and pain, but it had grown into something enduring and true, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of choosing kindness even when the world seemed cruel. As they grew older, Morgan and Diana made sure their children and grandchildren knew the full story of how they had met. Holding nothing back about the darkness Diana had escaped or the courage it had taken for both of them to open their hearts to love. They wanted their family to understand that love was not always easy or simple, that sometimes it required bravery and sacrifice, and the willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was dangerous. Victor Harding died in prison in 1895, and when Diana received the news, she felt nothing but a distant sense of closure. The man who had tried to destroy her had instead given her the push that led her to Morgan, and in a strange way, his cruelty had been the catalyst for the greatest happiness of her life. She never forgave him for what he had done, but she also refused to let him have any more power over her story. He was a footnote in a life filled with love and joy and purpose. Morgan lived to the age of 78, still working the ranch he loved right up until his final illness. He died peacefully in his sleep in 1930, with Deanna holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I love you, Deanna. Thank you for letting me carry you." Deanna followed him 3 years later, her health declining rapidly after losing the love of her life. On the day she died, surrounded by family in the home Morgan had built, she smiled and whispered, "I am coming, my love. You asked if I could walk, and now I can. I am walking home to you." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long, full lives. But their true legacy was not in stone. It was in the family they had created, in the ranch that still prospered under the care of their descendants, in the stories that were passed down through generations about the cowboy who had found a beaten woman in an alley and had asked if she could walk. And when she shook her head no crying, he had carried her to safety and then carried her heart for the rest of their lives. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the Fletcher Ranch, still raise cattle and horses on the same land Morgan had worked with his own hands. The original house has been preserved, maintained with love and care as a reminder of where it all started. And in the town of Gunnison, there is a small museum with an exhibit about the early settlers, including a section on Morgan and Deanna Fletcher, the rancher and his wife who had built an empire of love from the darkest of beginnings. Their story became local legend, told and retold with variations over the years, but the essential truth remained the same. He found her beaten in an alley. The cowboy asked if she could walk, and she shook her head, no crying. But instead of walking away, instead of leaving her to whatever fate awaited her, Morgan Fletcher had chosen kindness. He had chosen to help, to protect, to love. And that choice had changed both of their lives forever, creating a legacy that endured long after they were gone. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the violence that had brought them together, not the fear and pain that Diana had suffered, not the danger they had faced from Victor Harding and his hired guns. What mattered was the love they had built, the family they had created, the life they had lived together with courage and devotion and an unshakable commitment to each other. Morgan and Diana Fletcher's love story was not perfect or easy. It started in tragedy and was tested by adversity. But it was real and true and lasting, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is the possibility of light, that even when we cannot walk on our own, there are people willing to carry us until we can stand again. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, the person who carries us in our darkest hour becomes the person we walk beside for the rest of our lives, building something beautiful together from the broken pieces of what came before. That was the gift Morgan gave Diana when he found her in that alley and refused to leave her behind. And it was the gift Diana gave Morgan in return when she trusted him with her heart and built a life with him that exceeded both of their wildest dreams. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they shared lived on in every generation that came after them, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the simple choice to help someone in need. He found her beaten in the alley. The cowboy asked if she could walk, and she shook her head, no crying. But he did not walk away. He carried her to safety, and in doing so, he carried them both toward a future neither could have imagined. A future filled with love and laughter, and a family that would remember their story for generations to come. Never forgetting that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with an act of simple human kindness in a moment of desperate need.